Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're rebuilding one of the bigger attractions in the Sichuan Animal Sanctuary, a large Cretaceous Cruise. This cruise will wind through this section of the park and bring our guests face to face with a few large herbivores in the park, just not the sauropods from a few weeks back. By the end of today's episode, this section of the sanctuary will be home to 5 different prehistoric species, some cohabitating and others in more isolated spaces. We'll get to all the details really soon, but let's jump in and start rebuilding our Cretaceous Cruise in Jurassic World Evolution 3. So the first step is pretty straightforward. We need to get our Cretaceous Cruise entrance built, and similar to the lagoon entrance we worked on in the last episode, I'm leaning heavily into concrete for the exterior. I want this building to feel a little simpler in its construction, but I'll be mixing in some wood accents throughout the middle of the main wall to add a slight dimensional shift and give this building a little bit of character without going completely overboard. It's a small detail, but it is those little changes that definitely help me not build the exact same building over and over again. Obviously this isn't going to be perfect, but definitely feels like a level up from what I've done before. Last time I was here, I would have never even touched building this cruise construction area space. But this building is definitely on the boxier side. Operation buildings like this don't necessarily need to have a bunch of crazy architecture or design since they're built to serve a more professional purpose. That said, I also don't want this to feel like it's just a giant concrete cube sitting in the middle of the park. So I'm going to try to break up those flat walls a few ways I can, adding some depth around the entrance, creating a few sections that stick out from the main footprint, and mixing in different materials to help make the whole structure feel a little bit more believable. There's definitely a balance between just throwing building pieces at a concept versus being incredibly intentional with every piece, and I feel like I fall a little more on the conservative side of this and prefer to take a little more time and be intentional with what this looks like. Regardless, in reality, a Cretaceous cruise where a boat passes by a ton of different animals, and in this case dinosaurs, should already be exciting enough. We've got 5 different dinosaurs to experience along the ride, regardless of how good or bad the entrance is going to look. But we'll still try to make it look as good as we can here. We'll come back to some things here on the first level, but I am going to add a second story to this building here. Now, does this building actually need a second story? Probably not. From a gameplay standpoint, the cruise station would work perfectly fine as a single level structure. But from a realism perspective, and from my perspective, I'd like to imagine there's a lot more happening behind the scenes than our guests ever really get to see. So adding another floor gives us the room to tell that story. Maybe this is where the attraction managers have their offices, where the operations team monitors the boats throughout the day, or where the maintenance staff coordinate the repairs they're going to be doing all over this part of the park and daily inspections before the guests ever arrive. You could even imagine a break room overlooking the cruise route, security offices watching camera feeds. There's a ton of things we could do over here. None of that exists mechanically in the game, but it is those little bits of imagination that help this building to feel like it belongs a little more in the space. And what makes doing things like this fun every single time we continue to build new buildings, or at least new buildings for me, in these kind of parks. Now that we've got the basic concept of the Cretaceous Cruise station finished, it's time to zoom out and start building the guest experience around it. The station itself is only part of the attraction. What really makes an area feel complete is everything that's going to surround it. So before we jump into the habitat and landscaping, I want to establish the framework for this little guest hub. The first step is going to be putting that fence around the plaza. I like defining the space early because I feel like it gives me a better idea of where guests are supposed to move, where the landscaping should go, and where the different animals make the most sense. Once that perimeter is in place, it's much easier to fill in the details without the whole area feeling random. For this part of the sanctuary, the priorities are really just the essentials. I want guests to have access to the restroom, a storm shelter nearby, and enough space to comfortably gather before the cruise. The biggest thing I really need to build here is the staff entrance into the enclosure itself. Is that actually the correct strategy? From a gameplay perspective, honestly, I have no idea. It might not be the most efficient way to maximize guest satisfaction or profit, but that's not really the goal with this build or this park. I'm trying to create something that feels believable first, and then we optimize it second. And to get a 5-star rating for this park, you don't really need to worry about having amenities everywhere in this park. As we wrap up building this gate into the enclosure itself, the next step is going to take a little bit more planning than you might expect, because in a way we have to build the Cretaceous Cruise in reverse. I already know how I want the guests to experience the end of this cruise, so instead of starting at this first station and working my way forward, I'm planning backwards from the final scene. The goal is to have the cruise finish by passing through an aviary, and I think the ending of the attraction with a flying reptile soaring overhead is a really memorable way to wrap up that journey. After spending several minutes weaving through forests and alongside massive herbivores, guests will suddenly enter this enclosed environment where the pterodactyls are flying around them. It feels like a good finale. It gives the cruise a natural climax that you see coming the entire cruise before looping back to your station. The tricky part is making sure I don't accidentally shrink the habitat leading up to that point. Since the aviary has to fit at the end of this route, I need to work backwards and make sure there's still enough room for all of these large enclosures and large animals before we ever get there. It's a little bit like solving a puzzle. You know where one of these pieces goes, and in this case, the last piece, but you have to make everything else fit around it. I'm also trying to stay within the footprint of the original Cretaceous Cruise that existed in this section of the park. I could absolutely make this entire attraction bigger, but that's not really the direction I want it to go. Part of the challenge, and honestly part of the fun, is seeing how much better I can make this area while working roughly within the same amount of space. It makes this part of the rebuild feel a little more realistic, like we're renovating and improving an existing attraction rather than bulldozing half of the park to start over, even though I did bulldoze quite a bit of this park as we're going through it. If you watched the previous version of this cruise, you may not be surprised to hear that we ran into a few issues with the dinosaurs. Some of the animals had so much room that they wandered all over the place, making them difficult for guests to see all the time, and every once in a while they'd migrate further away from their habitat requirements, and those would dip. So it made things a little bit more chaotic. It wasn't a disaster, but it definitely wasn't as polished as I had hoped. This time, I'm reworking the species lineup to create a much better balance. The animals sharing these habitats have a much more compatible environment, and their needs are very similar, and the overall mix should be a lot simpler to manage while still feeling like a believable ecosystem. That means fewer headaches from a gameplay perspective, but it also helps the cruise itself. Guests should be more concerned about the opportunity to see the dinosaurs instead of long stretches wondering where the dinosaurs even wandered off. I wanted to show this a little bit here because I had multiple different variations of the Cretaceous Cruise aviary section. This was my first idea, and while it was fine, I decided I eventually demolished it a bit to start over with something a little bit cleaner. So for the animals in this cruise, we've got 4 other animals besides the pterodactyls to add here. Let's talk about them a little bit while we get this habitat and cruise ride put together. First, we have Sichuan, one of China's most recognizable dinosaurs. It's a duck-billed herbivore that's famous for the large hollowed crest on the top of its head. Scientists believe that that crest helped amplify its calls, allowing it to communicate with other members of the herd over long distances. It's also a really unique looking dinosaur, making it a perfect fit for a park centered around Chinese prehistoric wildlife. This is also the only animal in the cruise that our guests will have to manage boating around, as the other animals will be a little bit more well contained. The next habitat is going to contain Titan, whose name means giant swan and is one of my favorite animals to see in Jurassic World Evolution 3. It earned the name because of its incredibly long neck and its graceful appearance. Like Sichuan, it also had a hollow crest. It just looks a little bit different. Titan lived in what is now eastern Russia. It's not too far away from northeast China, so it still feels very at home in this region of the world, but I did want to slightly separate both of these animals that kind of look a little similar. We've also got Sinoceratops, one of the largest horned dinosaurs ever discovered outside North America. Its name means Chinese horned face, so felt very appropriate to have it here in the Sichuan Basin, and it was one of those animals we had originally had in this part of the park. Again, it was originally discovered in China, so it feels like an easy choice for this sanctuary. The final land animal is going to be a Margosaurus, and it's probably the odd one out. It's definitely the odd one out. It's actually from South America, but I wanted to include it here because of those incredible spines running down its neck and its back. Scientists still aren't completely sure what those were used for. They may have supported a sail for display similar to Patagotitan and Titanosaurus, or they could have acted like a form of defense. Either way, it gives this habitat a completely different silhouette compared to the other herbivores. It also sounds really cool. It's one of my favorite animals to just listen to as we go through this park. The last one that we've already talked a little bit about, and the one that I'm continuing to tweak the entrance for the Cretaceous Cruise bit, is that Sierradactylus, which will be waiting for guests at the very end of this cruise. The large pterosaur came from Brazil, similar close to the Amargasaurus, and was an excellent fish hunter. It used its long, tooth-filled jaws to snatch prey right from the water's surface. So because of things like that, it feels like an animal we would definitely want to keep away from our guests, and another reason that we're not going to be having our guests easily accessible to our Sierradactylus, who we would like them to have a diet primarily built on fish and not our guests. And that really wraps up this bit of the park. Thanks again for watching and being a part of this ride. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by liking the video. If you want the build code for this Cretaceous Cruise part, let me know in the comments and I'll share that with you. I just got back from a family vacation, so I will get to rebuilding the rest of the park. But until then, enjoy your day, enjoy the game, and I will see you on the next build.